Have you ever felt that someone was crossing your boundaries, but you couldn't explain exactly why? A strange sensation, almost a tightness in your chest, as if something was wrong, yet so subtle that you even doubted yourself. Carl Jung said that before we perceive external manipulation, we need to recognize the signals that awaken our own shadow. And often, these signals begin with a gesture so silent, so discreet, that it goes unnoticed even by the most attentive. What you're about to discover may surprise you, because manipulators don't start by dominating. They start by testing, and this test is far more common than you imagine. When faced with psychological manipulation, we almost always feel internal discomfort first, that sensation that something doesn't fit. But out of fear of seeming exaggerated due to old insecurities or past traumas, we do exactly what they expect most. We stay silent, and in that silence, the manipulator advances. He observes your movements, your reactions, your body. He measures the terrain. He conducts small social experiments to discover how far he can go without being confronted. It's a subtle game that begins with an almost invisible gesture, a cutting remark, an unexpected physical approach, a joke with no punchline, and carries a deep intention to test your emotional limits. Carl Jung believed that shadow dynamics appear precisely in those moments when you feel something has been violated, but you don't understand exactly what. This silent gesture, this micro-test of manipulation, activates parts of us that we don't recognize. The difficulty in setting boundaries, the fear of confrontation, the need to please, the insecurity in saying no. Have you experienced this? Perhaps in that complicated relationship, with that insistent colleague, that invasive family member, or even that romance that started well, but quickly left you on alert. Stay with me until the end, because today we'll deepen this mechanism with a psychological perspective that can completely transform how you perceive the intentions of those around you. Manipulation doesn't begin with screams. It begins with observation, with emotional reading, with tests. And that's what makes this gesture so dangerous. It doesn't seem dangerous, it seems innocent. Almost always accompanied by a smile, a quick excuse, it was just joking, or an attempt to minimize your perception. But Jung said that nothing unconscious is truly harmless. Every gesture that crosses your boundaries carries psychological content, and manipulators are experts at sniffing out exactly where your shadow is vulnerable. They approach slowly, as if they want nothing, but behind the apparent lightness lies a calculated intention to perceive your tolerance, your breaking point, your emotional limit. And perhaps that's why so many people only realize they've been manipulated when the game is already too far advanced, because it all started small, almost imperceptible, a minimal invasion you ignored, a discomfort you swallowed, a silent gesture you couldn't interpret, until now. And when you finally understand what this gesture means, the entire pattern starts to make sense. Each small situation fits like puzzle pieces that reveal something much deeper. So before we move forward, breathe and allow yourself to observe your own story with honesty. Perhaps you've already identified this gesture in your life and didn't notice, or perhaps you're living through it right now, this very moment, without knowing how to name it. But understanding this first movement of manipulation is the key to breaking the cycle. And that's exactly what we're going to unravel next, step by step, illuminating what was hidden before. And while you mentally revisit those moments when your boundaries were tested without you noticing, perhaps you can already identify how small attitudes had enough power to shake your emotional security. It's curious how the human mind works. Just one gesture, one micro-attack, is enough to trigger old memories, stored fears, and even wounds you didn't even remember existed. And it's precisely at this intersection between vulnerability and instinct that manipulators tend to operate. They don't need to raise their voice, they just need to decipher your silence. And deep down, you know when something isn't right. Your body knows, your intuition knows, but for some reason you hesitate, as if you still needed permission to trust your own perception. And since we're bringing this to consciousness, let me ask you something important. What's the biggest challenge in your self-knowledge process? Comment below. Your answer can help other people going through the same dilemma, and believe me, creating this space for sharing transforms not just the content, but the entire community that grows around it. If this topic resonates with you, tell us in the comments what touched you most so far. I read everything carefully, and it's your voice that brings life to this conversation. And since we're talking about psychological transformation and breaking patterns, let me ask you something simple, but very powerful, like this video. It may seem like a small gesture, and it is, but unlike the silent gesture of the manipulator, this one creates real impact. When you leave your like, YouTube understands that this topic matters, that these reflections have value, and it takes this message to more people who might be exactly at the awakening point you're experiencing now. If you believe these teachings can transform lives, leave your like so more people discover this truth. It's a way to validate that this type of content needs to continue existing. And if you feel you're ready to go deeper, if you're part of that small group of people who are truly willing to look in the mirror without masks, to face your own shadow and begin a journey of real self-knowledge, then subscribe to the channel now. Few people choose this journey. Most prefer to keep living on autopilot, repeating patterns and surviving emotionally. But if you want access to deep content, exclusive classes, and reflections that won't be released to everyone, this is the moment. Don't wait for the next opportunity. Transformation begins with a choice. Your choice. Your participation here, commenting, liking, subscribing, is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content. And it's in this collective movement that we begin to illuminate what was hidden, creating strength to deal with silent gestures, emotional limits, and everything Carl Jung called the psyche's call to integrate what we were taught to deny. And now that you understand how these micro-gestures can open important fissures in your consciousness, let's go even deeper into what really happens inside this psychological game and why it's so effective at trapping you without you noticing. Sometimes it all begins so discreetly that you don't even perceive the immediate impact. A touch you didn't ask for, a playful comment that strikes you strangely, criticism disguised as concern. It's that classic situation where the other person does something that seems too small to justify such a big discomfort. And yet, something inside you reacts. This is the type of minimal invasion that many ignore because it seems excessive to complain. But the body doesn't lie. It registers the discomfort before the rational mind tries to smooth over the situation. And it's precisely in this space between internal perception and external justification that manipulators tend to operate, because they know you'll probably doubt yourself first. Carl Jung spoke a lot about this dynamic, the conflict between what we feel and what we've learned to tolerate to maintain harmony around us, even if it costs our emotional integrity. You must have experienced something like this. Someone got too close, laughed at something that hurt you, made a comment that crossed an invisible boundary, but you swallowed it, gave a slight smile, let it pass. And why? Because it seemed too silly to become a problem. But actually, these small episodes carry a hidden truth that almost no one perceives. It's in these gestures that the silent test lies. The person observes your reaction, measures your discomfort, evaluates how far they can go. It seems like an exaggeration when stated like this, but you only need to remember how many times you only understood you were being manipulated after the game had advanced too much. It's like seeing behind the emotional scenes of your own story and realizing that everything began subtly, almost imperceptibly, like drops that shape a rock without it noticing. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because understanding these micro-gestures is the first step to changing your mindset and transforming how you make emotional decisions. The journey of self-knowledge passes through recognizing these signals you've always felt but never named. And when you start connecting each sensation, each small invasion, each ignored discomfort, everything gains new meaning, a meaning that reveals more about you than about the other person. It's precisely at this point that many people get lost, because the manipulator's gesture isn't obvious, isn't declared, isn't blatant. It happens in a detail that seems insignificant but carries a deep intention, a small invasion of space, that extra step that brings too close, a comment that strikes but comes wrapped in humor, a light provocation said casually, just to see if you react or remain silent. All of this is calculated. It's not an accident, it's not chance, it's a psychological test. The manipulator doesn't attack immediately. First he measures, observes, collects emotional information about you. He wants to discover how much you tolerate before setting boundaries, what your degree of discomfort is, and mainly if you're willing to give up your own well-being to keep the peace. It's in this instant that Carl Jung helps illuminate the hidden truth. The manipulator perceives the shadow you haven't yet integrated. He sees the hesitation you try to hide, the difficulty in saying no, the tendency to justify pain, to preserve harmony. He perceives your vulnerability before you even admit it exists, and that's too powerful to go unnoticed. Because when someone uses your shadow against you, they don't need to push, they just need to observe, just understand what you fear facing. From then on, every micro-transgression becomes an emotional map of who you are and how you react. And perhaps that's the most uncomfortable point. When you realize the gesture was small, but the intention behind it was enormous. You feel the emotional impact before understanding the psychological structure of what's happening. This changes your mindset, changes how you interpret your decisions, because manipulation doesn't reveal itself in big moves. It reveals itself backstage in subtlety, in what only appears when you really pay attention. And when you understand this, you realize it wasn't exaggeration, wasn't too much sensitivity. It was perception, a perception that was always there, but you didn't trust enough to name. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because understanding this silent gesture is the beginning of an important transformation in how you see your own boundaries. When you start identifying these small invasions as tests, everything changes. What seemed confusing starts to make sense. What seemed chance reveals patterns, and what you thought was all in your head reveals itself as an extremely precise emotional reading. The reason so many people don't notice this gesture immediately is deeper than it seems. Carl Jung said that within our shadow lives everything we learn to hide: old fears, painful memories, small wounds that never fully healed, the insecurity of not being enough, and the almost automatic need to please to avoid rejection. When someone touches precisely this sensitive point, even subtly, it's not your conscious part that reacts first, but this repressed part, which often responds with paralysis, silence, or guilt. It's as if something inside you says, "Don't cause problems, don't make anyone uncomfortable, pretend it didn't happen." And this seemingly docile response is gold for someone with manipulative intent. Manipulators sniff out this emotional gap effortlessly. They perceive the hesitation in your eyes, the smile that emerges to hide the discomfort, the subtle change in your breathing. They pick up these signals because they've already learned to navigate the emotional backstages of other people. While you try to rationalize, they simply observe, and this observation creates a detailed map of your vulnerability. The hidden truth is that it's not about weakness, it's about conditioning. You learned to survive this way, and it shaped your decisions, your mindset, your way of relating. It's no wonder so many people look back and think, "How didn't I see this before?" The answer lies in this internal dance between what you feel and what you fear showing. When you start seeing this with psychological clarity, something changes. It's like a light turns on inside you, and for the first time those murky situations gain definition. Suddenly, it's no longer confusion, it's recognition. It's no longer excessive sensitivity, it's refined emotional perception. And in understanding that your automatic reaction comes from the shadow, guilt gives way to consciousness. The journey of transformation begins exactly there, at the moment you realize it wasn't about being weak, but about carrying old patterns that were never questioned. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because when you understand why you react, you also start perceiving the impact of this on how you protect yourself, how you position yourself, and how you build boundaries. This revelation isn't to judge you, but to free you. One of the clearest ways to recognize this psychological test is to observe how certain people start crossing boundaries in very specific ways, almost rehearsed. First comes that unnecessary correction, as if what you said urgently needed adjusting, even when there was no mistake at all. Then the innocent comment appears, but somehow it strikes you, touches something too intimate to be said so casually. At other times, the person does something that bothers you just to measure your reaction, like someone casting bait and watching in silence. And when you show any sign of discomfort, they rush to say, "Relax, it's just joking," as if the problem were your sensitivity, not the intention behind the gesture. These signs seem disconnected when viewed in isolation, but form a pattern when you look more carefully. It's as if each small movement revealed part of the strategy. First, they test your tolerance. Then they evaluate your emotional response. Next, they check if you're willing to give up your own well-being to keep the peace. And all of this happens without you consciously noticing, because these micro-attacks hide behind a layer of normalcy. The emotional impact only appears when you understand that none of this was accidental. Carl Jung said that what we ignore in ourselves becomes fertile ground for manipulation. So perceiving these signals is not just a form of protection, but also an important step in your personal transformation journey. From the moment you recognize this growing pattern, something changes inside you. You stop seeing these situations as coincidences or miscalculated jokes and start seeing the hidden truth behind them. And in doing so, you recover an important part of your power, the power to interpret, decide, and act with consciousness. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because identifying these gestures is just the beginning. Real change happens when you learn to respond differently, when your mindset stops being guided by the fear of displeasing and starts being guided by clarity of your own worth. Each signal understood is like a small revelation, a piece that fits and shows you that you always had more perception than you imagined. The most liberating part of this process begins when you discover that you don't need to enter the manipulator's game. You don't need to justify, over-explain, or make excuses to protect the emotional comfort of someone who clearly isn't concerned with yours. The response that really breaks the manipulation cycle is simple, direct, and profoundly transformative. It begins when you name the behavior. Something like, "This is not comfortable for me." You don't need to raise your tone, don't need to seem aggressive, don't need to justify yourself. Just name it. This is the kind of phrase that changes the dynamic immediately, because it brings the hidden truth to the surface. The person realizes you saw the move, and from that moment on, the game stops being silent. And it's here that firmness comes into play. Not hard, rigid firmness that comes from anger, but calm firmness that springs from clarity. When you keep your tone steady, when you don't try to soften your words to avoid bothering someone, when you don't bend your own language to seem cool, something very profound happens inside you. It's as if your mind and body finally align. Your decisions start reflecting your internal reality, not the fear of disappointing someone. Carl Jung said that integrating the shadow is precisely about assuming this inner strength, stopping being controlled by the need for approval, and recognizing that your truth also deserves space. When you speak with this authenticity, you're not just responding to the other, you're responding to yourself. This type of posture completely changes the impact of relationships in your emotional journey. From the moment you position yourself without shrinking, without apologizing for existing, you break a pattern that may have followed you for years. And the beauty of it is that you don't need an elaborate speech, just a short, firm, sincere sentence. It's remarkable how something so simple can expose the backstage of manipulation and at the same time reveal the more conscious version of who you're becoming. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because when you discover how to respond, you also start understanding what this response awakens in the other, and mainly what it awakens in you. This internal change is what really starts a new mindset, a new understanding of boundaries, and a new type of personal power that doesn't depend on control, but on presence. When you start positioning yourself with clarity and without fear, something very profound changes in how the world perceives you. It's almost as if a new psychological frequency began to emit from you, a type of presence that communicates without needing words. I am not manipulable. And this isn't born from defensiveness, it's born from consciousness, because when you recognize your shadow, when you understand the fears that once paralyzed you and the wounds that made you give in, you stop being driven by what's hidden. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And that's exactly what happens when you transform your blind spots into strength. What was once fate becomes choice. You realize that manipulation only works on those who haven't yet integrated what they fear facing. Manipulators aren't looking for weak people. They're looking for people who don't know their own worth, people carrying internal doubts that can be exploited, people who think they need to accept anything to not lose peace. But when you connect with your own truth, This dynamic breaks instantly. It's not that the manipulator disappears from the world, it's that he loses access to your emotions. He tries, observes, tests, but nothing works like before, because his gaze meets someone who no longer needs approval, someone who knows exactly when something is wrong, someone who no longer gets confused by silent gestures. And this shift in consciousness has a gigantic impact on your journey. Your decisions change, your mindset changes, even your posture changes. What once threw you off balance now clarifies you. What once trapped you now frees you. You start walking with a sense of presence that's hard to explain but impossible to ignore. Manipulative people notice this quickly and back off. They know their old tricks don't work on someone who has already illuminated the backstage of their own psyche. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this internal change isn't just a defense, but a new way of existing, a transformation that makes you emotionally inaccessible to any attempt at control. The more you integrate who you really are, the more firmly you stand in your own center, and the less vulnerable you become to the patterns that once hurt you. When you realize that your boundaries are an extension of your identity, not an apology to the world, everything changes. Suddenly it becomes clear that for a long time, you molded yourself to others' expectations, gave in where you didn't want to, stayed silent when you should have spoken, shrunk when you needed to take up space. And this didn't happen because you didn't know what to do, but because you didn't fully know your own boundaries. Carl Jung said that what we leave in darkness ends up commanding our life from behind the curtain, and that's exactly how many people spend years living under limits they didn't choose, just accepted. This is the hidden truth no one teaches. If you don't define the boundary, someone else will define it for you. And when this repeats for too long, you start believing you have no choice, that you need to adapt to what the other wants, that your role is to keep things light even at the cost of your own peace. But there's a moment when something inside awakens, a kind of silent revelation, a click that says, I deserve to exist whole, not in halves. And it's in this instant that transformation begins, because you finally realize the impact you've been living by ignoring your own truth. The emotional weight, the sensation of suffocation, the exhaustion that seemed inevitable. All of this starts having a name. It starts having context. It starts having a way out. Illuminating your own shadow isn't a magical process. It's an honest one. It's looking inward and admitting you erased yourself in moments when you should have stood up. It's recognizing that behind each concession was an old fear of losing love, approval, or security. But by seeing these roots clearly, you understand that taking charge of your own psyche isn't about confrontation. It's about consciousness. It's about stopping living as a reaction to the world and starting living by choosing. Choosing who enters, how they enter, how far they enter. Choosing what you tolerate and what you don't tolerate anymore. Choosing yourself. And that alone completely changes how people treat you. When your mindset changes, your energy changes. When your energy changes, your boundaries become visible. And when your boundaries become visible, you stop being vulnerable territory and become defined territory. Not because you became rigid, but because you finally became whole and emotional. Freedom is born precisely from this, from no longer allowing others to make choices for you. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because understanding your boundaries is just the first step. Living from them is where the real journey begins, and that's where transformation truly consolidates. If you've made it this far, you can feel that this subject is part of your transformation journey. And that's exactly why I want to thank you for staying with me until the end, because this type of content only comes alive when it meets someone willing to truly look inward. If this video brought you clarity, insight, or simply that feeling of, now it all makes sense, leave your like. This simple gesture strengthens the exchange we've built here and helps me continue bringing deep content like this. And since you came to the end, leave a comment saying, I remain conscious. That way I know you walked with me through each stage of this reflection. It's always special to see who really immerses themselves in the process until the very last minute. If you want to follow this path of real self-knowledge, without superficiality, without shortcuts, without ready-made phrases, subscribe to the channel. This shows me that what we're building here makes sense to you and also guarantees you access to the next conversations that will deepen even more this mindset we're awakening together. And since you're here, take advantage of the momentum. There's a video right beside this one that complements this topic perfectly. Click and continue with me there. The conversation is just beginning.